Hello, this is going to be my documentation of all my design work and iterations. Not all of it exactly, but just some of my key inspirations, whether that be within game titles, first-hand research when I traveled to France, and I will also be covering my world building and going into the environmental storytelling and how this coincides with gameplay, how it uplifts the narrative, and why it's actually relevant to the player, and how sightlines try to coerce the player into moving into certain locations. So, one of the key features of Echoes of the Forgotten was to ensure that the player always felt like they were uncovering the world, but we wanted a sense of familiarity because the narrative is that you're returning to your old kingdom. A time skip has happened and now it's now under new control. So taking inspiration from game series such as Arcane's Dishonored, where you're returning to Dunwall, but it's now under a more fascist regime, which has just been turning a lot of natural elements into quite crude, dystopian, capitalist, monolithic structures. So that was kind of one of the main details. We wanted to kind of have a world that was drenched in decay, but also attempting to survive and struggle. I wanted to try and create optimal um, lighting to try and persuade the player's movement, and also inform them of enemies. But then I also want the light to try and sometimes show a shadow and you think that it's one enemy, and then all of a sudden another one comes at you of where you thought that it was coming from, and then you have a nice little personal moment where you feel like you've just uncovered something. And I want to try and make different areas all feel as if they're their own personal rooms, because my level's quite big, so a key point was trying to keep it broken up and each area to feel like their own separate storyline. And I want all of them to flow from one to the other. So beginning is the ascent out of the church, and then you get the wide panning shot of the construction happening in the new area, so kind of the old town of West Everbaratio. And then as you kind of get to the gatehouse, your progress is stopped and you're forced to go through the industrial yards and kind of live through the stories of the common people a little bit more. And that is an intentional slice that the player is forced to go through, which was changed to being just jumping over some sunken houses, because I thought making the player walk through a lived-in area as opposed to just seeing how some people have been punished and their houses are now under the blood river because of changing. It seemed a little bit too quick for the player to just quickly jump over 3 or 4 times. Didn't really give them much room to really digest what they're actually seeing. So I really wanted to make a core point of showing off different districts, whether that be the under construction area, the industrial district, the housing district, and then going up the ramp into the higher fortifications, which leads up to the kingdom of the queen. Okay, so some key inspirations immediately off my project. The concept was kind of always to be a Souls-like dark fantasy kind of style. Immediately, Undead Settlement from DS3 hit me because it's very similar to the Undead Burg, which I love as an area in Dark Souls 1. But the Undead Settlement kind of features a really lived-in decay, where it's not just a place that's fallen to ruin. This is a place that is now being changed because of the circumstance. So in the bottom left picture here, you can see the Curse Rotted Greatwood, which is a boss enemy, and throughout all the levels, kind of these roots of these big trees are pulling apart and tearing apart the landscape. And it's kind of a key theme of Echoes of the Forgotten, where I have the biomagic being used from the corpses of the people who have been slain in the war. It's kind of just now changed the landscape into being a more hostile environment. Some primary research. Sorry, the slide was taking a while. I recently travelled to France and I was in the south and I was seeing a lot of beautiful cities such as Menton, Godon. There was a lot of other places that I don't know the names of so well, but you'll be able to find in my documentation. So a lot of the key features of French cities here are high vantage points over like the coastline, which is a very rare thing to me as an Englishman because most of our coasts are quite low lying. So I really wanted to try and match that feel of being right next to a sea town with very high structures that separate the common people and the upper class, as well as a lot of the motifs I already think suit a European medieval style, and adding it from one of the Romance countries, I think gives a nice spin and a nice opposite to the Japanese style that Enrique is going for, as opposed to just the standard English European, which is quite commonplace in the Souls titles, just to be very Western fantasy. Some world building in effect here. The top left image is the spawn point, so as you can see the biomagic is pouring out of this coffin, as well as the first key item being within a skeleton's ribcage, and as you can see the light peering around the room, kind of just building up the theme that there is a theme of death and energy stemming from the death. And I think the player coming from a glowing coffin with a ribcage light glowing throughout the room. Then as the player progresses, they take their sword that's been attacked by one of the enemies, their body, and loads of biomagic light oozing over the room. And you go up into the church, and you see the same thing with this head being taken off, and the same thing happening. And a lot of the viewpoints as the player comes out here, there's a lot of parallaxing here to try and draw attention up to the bell, up to the sight line, up to the way out, and all of these kind of things will just kind of coerce the player to move forwards. As you can see, more of the statue motif here of the leader of the rebellion, which is your master, who has now been kind of trying to be annaled out of history. You can still see that people are still praying to him, and these places still have a lot of biomagic oozing through them because their prayer and belief systems are still strong, so therefore they still have their internal power. And the construction yard, I just wanted to show that the area has kind of fallen into ruin, so there's now just these crude industrial sewer pipes pumping out viscera and blood, and people are being forced to work on them, just in trying to harvest the biomagic for the evil queen. Some elements of how I try to use light and flow. So very often I'll have long cascading shadows trying to entice players in, and if a player were to go towards this guy here, this guy will come running out and create a moment where the player is surprised. I also try to include sections where the player can stealth past things. So for instance, if the player wants to, they can sneak past this market stall and go into here. And there's just different options to take out different things, but always trying to give players relevant information so they're not consistently being snuck up on. And even here, this sword is poking out, just giving fairness to these moments and only punishing players that get a little bit too ahead of themselves. Because I think making players feel cautious about moving in the world will try to make them actually appreciate and digest what they're looking at. And as you can see here, more of the game world, just going up these stairs, an enemy hiding just behind this wardrobe door. Here, some apples falling down, appearing in the light, and them leading towards someone who's pushed them. So kind of just your sight line naturally wondering why this has happened, you follow this, and then you'll see this. And it's very a natural human pattern recognition to see something like that, but I think when you're playing a game and you notice something like that, it really feels like you've actually noticed the enemy that's behind the obvious stack of boxes in the obvious moment where an enemy would be. But moments like that, I think, just try to redeem the obvious gameplay of it and give it contextual relevance, and also rewards the player for noticing it. These are some of the viewpoints, some of the player paths. So the player starts in from the bottom of the church, and as you can see, a lot of my level design focuses on making the player go in and out of areas, like in and around, because I don't want the player to just be able to beeline things. If the player was able to beeline in a few of the earlier origins of the game, the player was initially starting from, hopefully you can keep up with what I'm showing you here if you're showing the level design, but you start from the boat here, and the point was to clear out this area. If this bridge doesn't work, over these fallen houses here, and then you would just be jumping over here back into this. So instead, I've made the player spawn in here, give them an ascent out of the church, presented viewpoints, given them reason to actually explore within these sewer things first, or go in, down, and start from the lower point, representing of how the old religion has been now just starting to get demolished, and this is one of the last corners of where this is, and they actually have to directly interact with the fortifications and construction going on. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, this way leads to the forest here. The forest is a much smaller area. There's just a secret chest and the boss enemy in it. Didn't think it was worth showing the player path thing because it's just a very boss fight centric room. And as the player progresses, they're forced to go into the construction area, and they're given viewpoints of all the estate district first, but the player is enticed to either go towards the blue light or the orange, kind of just separating these two areas and creating kind of a dark, I don't know what the word is, unfamiliar and more hostile territory of these houses that are currently being raided. And they have a lot of low-lying streets covered up with planks, as well as upper and lower stairs that kind of just create a little bit of a mazy environment for these rooms. And over here, to break up the pacing, I have a more open area where the player has an ascent up into a secret boss here. Carrying on into the estate district, the player is immediately presented with an immediate path towards this broken bridge, and the player sees this from a lot of areas. And sorry, I just have to wet my lips. And this area is presentable from a lot of areas, and it's a destroyed bridge trying to build up the narrative that these areas were rejected by the kingdom when the common people tried to throw a revolution because they don't like their work conditions, and their sons and daughters were being sent to war for a crusade that they wanted to be no part of. So the player's progression, either going through here, they will be presented with the cannon, which will open up this, which you're shooting down the enemy statue, and there's also a broken statue head which is being prayed to down here. So once again, reaffirming that there are people in this land that still have hope for the Echo and better times. So just more of that religious imagery of where you're trying to actually help your people, and direct correlation to destroying the enemy's religious figures to try and cause a reaction to make them open this gate. So just giving actual intertextual resonance to the player and giving them reason to actually attack the enemies to force them to progress. And another few other ways, if the player takes these paths, taking the main path through here will aggro a lot of enemies in these buildings, so there's kind of intention to sneak around and clear them out, but it's obviously up to the player. And same with this area here, if you just go here you'll aggro this boss, and then if you go here all these enemies and these raiding parties will come out and attack you. But there are plenty of ways and opportunities to sneak and get the drop on, and even around here you can even avoid this boss enemy if you'd want. So there's just different opportunities. And this area here, I try to incentivize players coming here with a chest in this chest within this boat, but it's still, I think, a little bit out of the beaten track, and I think this walkway would be more valuable if it was kind of coming from here. So this was more, because this is very hidden behind this stuff, which at first worked because the player was starting here and they had options to uncover. But as of right now, I think this is a little bit tacked on, and it's a nice area, but I just think it needs to be a little bit more visible from a lot more spots. And one of the key things for lighting in this area was to try and create a more magical glow, as if people here still had a bit more faith than this area. So this is very dark, bloody, the campfire lights, and this still has the magical industrial lighting. So kind of giving off a theme that either this is a higher wealth area, or that there's more in tune in the magic in this area, which is kind of both the running narratives right now, because this is supposed to be under construction to be a higher class area, but it's also supposed to be more magical energy because people still pray here. So just a few ideas of the reasoning there. As the player progresses up into the fortifications, you can immediately see the level design becomes a lot blockier, a lot chunkier, and this is intentional to try and change the pacing. So instead of less tight back alley streets, this is just more fortified. We have blacksmiths here, big chain doors, plenty of lights. None of the magical lighting, as you can see here, to try and make this area feel a little bit more hostile and less magical. And I think the warm lighting does a good job of creating an intimidating yet safe to explore area, because I didn't want to just have an entirely dark maze-like army base for the player to be accessing. So the players pass here, I've interacted with the golems through these houses, up these ramps, or the player can go through here and they'll see this glass, they can look up, see that the route is broken here, and they've got these stairs and head up. Or the player can interact with this, climb up here and go up. So this area, I think, initially was a little bit of an added-on area, and another one of the ideas was starting the player from here. They come down in a cart where they're going to be shipped to the ocean, and the player wakes up here and has to break out of this area and then get to the church to try and bring back someone. But it's kind of, I feel like the idea of starting from the church and kind of ascending through the land makes a bit more sense to get revenge as opposed to escaping, just at least for this level design where it's only one level. So that was the reasoning as to why this is now the end. Another side view of just showing the player of the stairs up here. And up here, you break out of the garden up here, and this is just one of the Vridra drakes, which is an electric one. And the point is, you kill this guy, you get his bolt runes, and you go in here, and because you have those, you activate one of these golems, and then you're put into the final boss fight of the level. A little bit of an unfinished area, but I kind of just wanted to have high viewpoints to show off a foreboding structure in the background, so I just made a big monolithic structure. And the golems are a reoccurring theme of the higher order trying to take them and recharge them, so I thought it was cool that the player can act as a conduit for that, because they're undead and the echo. So that's kind of a bit of the narrative reasoning there. So I think that will cover the 6 to 7 minutes I'm supposed to be doing. I hope so. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.